Some childhood memories were so scary to me that I'll never forget them. Like this one memory I'm about to share with you. This happened during summer vacation in July of 2013 when I was about 10 years old. My parents had booked an Airbnb cabin in Estes Park, Colorado. We wanted to spend time near Rocky Mountain National Park, enjoy hiking, and just get away from city life in Denver for a few days. We arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon. It was cozy and simple, nestled deep into the woods at the end of a gravel road. The house was old but comfortable, surrounded by tall pines and spruces. We unpacked our stuff quickly, excited to explore. My parents cooked dinner while I explored the property. There wasn't much around besides trees and a small clearing where I could kick my soccer ball. That first night felt completely normal. We made s'mores on the small fire pit behind the house and talked about plans for hiking the next day. We went to sleep early because we wanted to wake up at sunrise. The next day was amazing. We went hiking on a trail called Bear Lake. My dad told me stories about when he was younger, and my mom showed me how to identify animal tracks in the dirt. Everything felt great, and nothing seemed strange. By the time we returned to the cabin, it was evening, and we were all tired. My mom cooked spaghetti, and we relaxed watching some old DVDs the owners had left. But it was the second night that things started to get weird. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up needing to go to the bathroom. The cabin was dark with only the dim glow from a hallway night light to guide me. I tiptoed past my parents' room so I wouldn't wake them. As I reached the hallway window, something made me stop and glance outside. Standing perfectly still, just about 10 feet away from the front porch, was a man wearing a mask. It was a white mask that covered his whole face with wide black holes where the eyes should have been. He wasn't moving, not even a twitch, and he faced directly towards our cabin. My heart instantly started beating hard, and my legs froze in place. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I stood there frozen, staring back at the masked figure. After a minute, which felt like forever, he slowly tilted his head as if he noticed me looking at him through the window. Panic rushed over me, and I ran to my parents' bedroom, crying loudly. They both jumped awake and asked what was wrong. I told them there was a man in a scary mask standing outside. My dad quickly got up, grabbed a flashlight, and hurried to the living room window. My mom held me close, whispering that everything would be okay. But when my dad looked outside, he said no one was there. He opened the front door and shined his flashlight around the property. Nothing but trees and shadows. My parents told me it must have been a bad dream. I was sure it wasn't, but eventually exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep between them. The next morning, we checked around the cabin. My dad found footprints in the dirt near the spot I described. Now he believed me. He was quiet and tense, and I noticed him whispering seriously to my mom when they thought I wasn't looking. We spent the whole day away from the cabin, trying to act normal. We drove around Estes Park, ate lunch in town, and visited small stores. My parents pretended nothing happened, but I could tell they were worried. That night, I felt nervous to sleep, but eventually I did. Around exactly 2 a.m. again, something woke me up. This time, it was a soft tapping sound coming from outside the living room window. My parents were already awake, standing in the living room, whispering nervously. They had heard it, too. My dad turned off the lights inside, picked up a flashlight, and moved quietly toward the window. I followed behind, holding onto my mom's hand. When he pulled the curtain back slightly, we saw the masked man again, standing closer this time, directly outside the window. His face was tilted down, but as soon as the curtain moved, he raised his head slowly to look straight at us. His masked face, emotionless and white, stared directly at my dad. My dad stepped back quickly, his face turning pale. Without saying a word, he rushed to grab the car keys. My mom quickly put our essentials in a bag while I stood frozen, watching the masked man still standing there. He never moved. He just stood like a statue, looking straight into our cabin. Within minutes, we hurried outside, locking the door behind us. My dad kept me close as we ran toward the car parked on a gravel driveway. The masked man was gone from the window, and the darkness around us felt like it hid many eyes watching silently from behind the trees. We drove quickly down the gravel road, not looking back. I felt cold inside. The image of the masked man staring at me burned deeply into my memory. My parents were silent as we left Estes Park behind and eventually reached a motel closer to Boulder, where we stayed until sunrise. We never called the police. My parents argued about it briefly, but ultimately they chose not to. I think they were too frightened, or maybe they didn't believe anyone would take us seriously. Either way, we quietly returned home to Denver the next day, leaving the masked man behind us. Years passed, and my parents avoided speaking about that vacation. But I never forgot. Every time we drove past a dark, lonely forest or stayed somewhere new, I'd find myself watching the windows at night, half expecting to see a white mask silently staring back at me from the shadows. I sometimes wonder who he was or what he wanted. Was it a prank? Was he dangerous? We never learned the answer, and part of me doesn't want to know. But since that night, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something could be silently watching me from outside my window, waiting patiently in the darkness. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your support means the world to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. It was June 2014 when I decided my daughter and I needed a break from everything. 6 months earlier, my husband Mark had been working in Johannesburg on a short-term contract. One night, he stopped at a small grocery on his way home. A robbery went bad, and he never made it back to his hotel. That single phone call from the consulate changed our whole world. Since then, my 7-year-old Leah has started waking from the same nightmare. Her dad waving from a faraway road and then fading into headlights. I was no better. Work, bills, grief, counseling, it all stacked up. I thought a quiet trip might help us breathe. So I booked a 2-bedroom log cabin on Airbnb outside Libby, Montana, right by Kutai National Forest. The description promised mountain air, no nearby houses, and real silence. It sounded like the reset we needed. We flew from Denver to Spokane, rented a Subaru, and crossed into Montana beneath bright blue sky. Cell service vanished 20 m south of Libby. The gravel road to the cabin was single lane, winding between walls of pine. Leah pointed at a creek flashing beside the road and asked if deer lived there. I told her probably, and she smiled for the first time in weeks. The cabin sat in a clearing above the creek. There was an old swing set off to one side, paint peeling, and a stack of split logs by the porch. A hand-painted sign on the door said, "Welcome guests, Mikasa Sukasa." I found a key in a lockbox and carried our bags inside. Everything looked as listed. Knotty pine walls, basic kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a stone fireplace with a half-burned log left in place. A thin binder on the coffee table held house rules and a single page about the owner, Cliff Hansen, a retired carpenter, local since 1978. It said he lived 2 ridges over and might stop by to check the wood stove. Leah and I roasted hot dogs in a cast-iron pan and ate on the porch while the sky faded to deep purple. No traffic, no voices, just the hum of insects and the rush of the creek below. Later, we built a small fire inside and read Charlotte's Web. I waited for grief to creep in, but the quiet felt good. When Leah finally slept, I sat in the living room, letting the flames crackle. The clock on the stove blinked 10:06 p.m. I wrote a note in my journal. Maybe this is the first night I don't cry. The second day passed calmly. We hiked a half-mile down to the creek, skipped stones, and packed a picnic lunch. Afternoon clouds gathered, so we headed back to beat the rain. Around 6, I ran a bath for Leah. Steam fogged the mirror while she played with a plastic boat we'd found under the sink. I had just wrapped her in a towel when the front door opened. Boots thudded it on the wood floor. "Hello," a man's voice called. I startled, but answered. One moment, I hurried into the hallway, holding Leah's hand. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s stood by the couch, cap in hand. Weathered cheeks, silver beard, eyes the color of cut slate. "Evening, ma'am. I'm Cliff, the owner," he said. "Storm's rolling in. Thought I'd drop dry firewood and make sure you're settled." His tone was friendly, almost fatherly. Still, my pulse raced. I remembered the listing saying he might stop by, but I had expected a knock. "I appreciate it. I managed. Just give us a second to get decent next time, please." He looked down, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am. My apologies." He stacked 4 logs by the fireplace, checked the damper, and glanced at Leah. "You like s'mores?" I left supplies in the pantry. She half hid behind me, but nodded. Then he was gone, boots crunching on gravel as rain started to tap the roof. The whole visit lasted maybe 2 minutes, but my nerves were buzzing. No cell reception meant no easy call to anyone. Honest, something felt wrong. I forced myself to breathe and carried on with the evening. The storm hit around midnight. Thunder shook the windows and wind drove rain sideways. I lay awake listening. At 1:27 a.m., just after a loud crack of thunder, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. The front boards creaked once, twice, then stopped. No knock, no voice. I sat up, every muscle rigid. Leah slept in the other room, night light glowing beneath her door. The cabin had no deadbolt, only a standard turn lock. I slipped out of bed and eased into the living room. The embers in the fireplace cast a dull orange light. Shadows jumped across the walls whenever lightning flashed. On the couch lay a dark shape. My breath stuck. Another flash revealed it. A canvas duff I didn't recognize, wet from rain sitting on the cushion. The front door was ajar by 2 inches. I pushed it shut and clicked the lock, then scanned the room. Nothing else moved. I couldn't bring myself to open the duffel. Instead, I ran to Leah's room, closed her door, and stood listening. Thunder rolled overhead. No more footfalls. I stayed like that, hand on the knob, heart pounding, until exhaustion finally forced me to the floor beside her bed. I must have slept in snatches because the next thing I knew, pale light pushed through the curtains. Bird song replaced thunder. Rain still dripped from the eaves. Leah stirred and asked for cereal. I told her to stay in the room while I checked something. In the living room, the canvas duff was gone. So was every piece of firewood Cliff had delivered. The front door was closed, but the muddy outline of a boot remained on the threshold. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The swing set creaked in a light breeze, but there were no footprints on the gravel. Overnight rain had washed them away. I walked the perimeter of the cabin. Behind it, about 20 feet from Leah's bedroom window, lay 3 fresh cigarette butts pinched out on a flat rock. Nearby, 2 empty drink cans rested against a tree. My skin prickled. Cliff's binder had said, "No smoking on the property." Back inside, I wrote a quick note. "Emergency, family matter. Had to leave early." I packed in 10 minutes. Leah sensed my urgency and didn't argue. By 8, we were bumping down the gravel road. Subaru loaded. I kept checking the rear-view mirror. 10 minutes from the cabin. The road climbed a rise. Through the trees, I could see the roof of the place one last time. A pickup had pulled into the clearing, dark green, older model. 2 men stood by the porch talking. One wore a baseball cap and a jacket the color of clay. The other, taller, had a silver beard and a familiar build. They both turned toward the road as my car crested the hill. I pressed the gas without thinking. The rental fishtailed on wet gravel before catching traction. I didn't slow until I reached Highway 2, where my phone finally showed 1 bar of service. I called my sister from a gas station in Libby. While Leah ate a chocolate glazed donut, I reported the listing to Airbnb, then watched the bars on my screen climb as we drove east toward Kalispell. By afternoon, we were on a flight back to Denver. Airbnb refunded my stay and suspended the listing, but they couldn't answer the real question. Who were those men, and why had they been inside the cabin? Police in Lincoln County said they'd go look, yet I never heard an update. I sometimes picture the duffel on that couch. I think about what might have been inside. Rope, tools, or maybe nothing at all. The truth is, it doesn't matter. A stranger crossing your threshold without permission is enough. Since that night, Leah and I have rented only hotels, places with desk clerks and cameras, and other guests a wall away. Last week, Leah asked if we could visit Glacier National Park. I told her maybe someday, but we'll stay in town minutes from the sheriff's office with plenty of cell service. For now, home feels safest, and when the house feels too quiet, I'll light a candle for Mark, hold my daughter close, and remind myself that leaving that cabin was the best decision I've made since the worst day of my life. I have always felt most at peace near water and trees. Back in August 2023, after a rough stretch of my office job in Seattle, I booked an Airbnb on the south shore of Lake Quinault in Washington State. The cabin sat inside Olympic National Forest, 20 m from the nearest town and just a short walk from the lake itself. My wife, April, was just as eager to trade traffic noise for the heavy hush of tall cedars. So, we packed our little hatchback and drove Highway 101 until our phone showed one lonely bar of service. The place looked perfect when we arrived. A single-story log cabin, tin roof, 2 small bedrooms, and a living room with a wide window facing the water. A narrow deck wrapped around the back, and a stone path led down to a tiny dock. The guest book said the mountain bike trail that circles Colonel Bob Peak crossed a fire road half a mile away, so we expected to see cyclists. Now and then, but otherwise it felt like our own pocket of wilderness. We unloaded groceries, opened the windows to let the pines smell in, and listened to loons call across the water while evening drifted down. Wednesday and Thursday felt like the honeymoon we never took. We hiked the Quinault Loop under mossy maples, caught 2 small trout off the dock, and grilled them with lemon and a little salt. A pair of riders passed us on the trail each morning, tires crunching on gravel, but no one else came near the cabin. By Friday, I could feel the knot in my shoulders finally loosen. That Friday night around 10 o'clock, April and I were stretched on the couch watching an old sitcom DVD, rain tapping lightly on the roof. The knock on the front door sounded polite, 3 quick raps. Yet, it startled both of us because we hadn't heard an engine or footsteps outside. I muted the TV, grabbed the flashlight the host left by the firewood rack, and opened the door crack. A young man stood there holding a mountain bike by the handlebars. He wore a thin headlamp around his helmet, patches of mud on his shins, and a nervous grin. "Sorry to bother you folks," he said, voice slightly breathless. "I'm Ethan. I came up from Portland to ride Colonel Bob, but my phone died, and I didn't realize how fast it gets dark in these woods. The descent back to the main road is rough, and I don't feel safe taking it at night. Any chance I could crash on your porch until daylight?" My first instinct was to apologize and send him on his way. The guest rules mentioned no unregistered overnight visitors. But April touched my arm. She said, "There's room inside. It's raining harder now. Let's not leave him out here." I hesitated, then stepped back and opened the door. Ethan rolled his bike onto the deck and wiped his shoes carefully before entering. We set him up on the living room sofa with an extra quilt and handed him a plate of reheated trout and boiled potatoes. He seemed genuinely thankful, asked nothing more than our first names, then turned off the lamp and went to sleep while we brushed our teeth. Saturday morning, he was up before us packing his small frame bag. He left $20 on the coffee table for electricity and hot water, thanked us again, and pushed off down the gravel lane. The rest of Saturday was ordinary. We kayaked along the lake's edge, spotted an osprey diving for fish, and toasted marshmallows after sunset. The quiet felt restored. Sunday was meant to be our last full day. We spent the afternoon cleaning the cabin, folding linens, and boxing leftover food for the cooler. Around 9 o'clock, we crawled into bed, rain again soft on the roof. At 3:07 a.m., a time forever stamped in my head, I woke to sharp glass hitting tile. It came from the kitchen 10 feet from our bedroom door. I whispered to April to stay put, slid out of bed, and took the flashlight from the nightstand. The kitchen light was off, but in the beam of the flashlight, I saw a clear tumbler in 2 pieces on the floor near the sink. The small kitchen window above the counter stood open inward, rain dripping from the frame. Cool air smelled of wet cedar. I listened for a long minute. Nothing stirred except the refrigerator hum. I convinced myself wind had pushed the unlocked window open and knocked the glass from the drying rack. I closed the window, latched it, swept the shards into a dustpan, and went back to bed. Morning sun broke through low clouds, and birds chattered just beyond the deck. April walked into the kitchen to start coffee and called my name in a shaky voice. Muddy footprints, heel to toe, ran from the window to the hallway, then back to the window again. They were narrow, almost exactly the width of a cycling shoe. 2 of my shirts, April's e-reader, and the leather wallet I had left on the counter were missing. So was the envelope of tip money we intended to leave for the host. The cabin had 1 security camera above the sliding door, aimed at the kitchen and living room. I pulled the memory card, loaded the video on my laptop, and scrubbed through the night. At 3:02 a.m., A silhouette appeared outside the window. The man eased it open with gloved hands, stepped onto the sink, and dropped to the floor. When the tumbler fell, he flinched but didn't hurry. He went first to the hallway, toward our bedroom. 2 minutes later, the video showed me entering with the flashlight. The man flattened himself against the pantry door behind me, so close that if I had taken one pace backward, our shoulders would have touched. After I left, he collected the items, crawled out the same way, and jogged toward the woods. The headlamp on his helmet clicked on for a second and lit the camera enough for me to see a familiar face, Ethan. We drove to the small sheriff's substation in Amanda Park, 30 minutes south. The deputy on duty listened, copied the video to a flash drive, and told us Ethan matched the description from 2 unsolved break-ins along the mountain bike trail that summer. Riders had reported meeting a friendly stranger who later stole from cabins while guests slept. The deputy said he would alert surrounding counties, but warned us that transient cyclists were hard to track. April and I returned to Seattle that evening, our car half as quiet as the drive-in. The host refunded our stay and added deadbolts and motion lights to his property. But the deputy called a month later to say no arrests had been made.